Hello, and welcome to God's Hookups television show. This is Dr. Barbara Young, your host, and this is a show that features up close and personal interviews with guests from all walks of life who share their stories about unexplainable blessings, successful events, and extraordinary miracles and encounters that can only be of God's hookup. You will receive hope, enlightenment, encouragement that will feed your spirit and your soul. Now, to my guest today. Hello, Mel Mason, and welcome to God's Hookups. I am so happy to have you on the show today. This has been really an exciting time for me, just to have you on the show. I mean, really, you're an incredible woman, and I want to just share with my listeners who Mel Mason is. She's got it already on the crossway. She is the clutter expert, best-selling author, and she's got a new book coming out. And if we'll have time, we'll share about that book today. But Mel, welcome to God's Hookups.
Dr. B, thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. I just love your energy and I love hanging out with you. So thank you so much.
With you. I had you on my regular Transformation for Success radio talk show. And I have to tell my viewers out there, she was a hit. She was a hit. So today we're not going to talk about clutter. You have to get that show on Transformation for Success. But we're going to talk about her amazing stories of her God's hookups with God. So Mel?
Be happy to. I really feel like my life has just been divinely guided. I was about 5 years old, and my parents separated when I was 4 or 5. They divorced, and I never went to church. I wasn't introduced to God in any way. And my first memory of God was I was actually standing outside with my best friend, and she was with her dad. They were getting ready to go for a motorcycle ride. And I was just standing out there and we were having a conversation. And then all of a sudden, this knowing from God just came over me that we're all brothers and sisters because we come from the same Father. Now I didn't go to church. I didn't know anything about God. But at 5 years old, this knowing just comes over me that we're all brothers and sisters because we come from the same Father.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That is, at 5. Wow. Well, the story goes on. So.
Yeah, my life has really just been about following the breadcrumbs of spirit. Everything in my life, I was about. It's interesting because my parents didn't go to church. My mom didn't go to church. And a few years later, my mom and I lived in this neighborhood down the street from her, one of her high school best friends. And her best friend from high school wanted to start taking me to pioneer clubs, which is like the kids, get-togethers and learning about the 10 Commandments and stuff at the local Baptist church. So God hooked me up with this woman and brought me into this church where I was just a sponge. Like I was soaking everything up. I have no other way to describe it, but that I was just an absolute sponge and was introduced to God. I actually became a Christian at that point in my life and was in the church. I was this bright shining light in the church, and I was, converting everybody to Christianity. And it was an amazing experience in my life. Yes. And just watching how God has just come into my life and taking me through all these processes. But the interesting thing that happened was, your listeners that didn't hear my story on Transformation for Success, I lost my brother to suicide when I was 15 years old. So I had been in the church since I was about 8 years old. Right. And there were some people in the church that actually told me that my brother was burning in hell because he committed suicide. And I had this big faith crisis, and I abandoned the Christian church, and I wound up going on this huge just journey of trying out all these different things, but everything was still following the breadcrumbs of spirit because God was always leading my life, absolutely always leading my life. And the first thing that happened was he led me to yoga and mindfulness, which is the core of what transformed my life, learning how to be present in my body for all the stuff that I had been running from, losing my brother to suicide, being abused, being molested, all of that stuff. And
I want to bookmark something that I think is important for the viewers to know that was shared maybe on the other show. was that not only had you gone through, you just mentioned, sexual abuse, the suicide of your brother, but the thing I think is important is how God, in his infinite mercy at 15, and this resonated with me, and I've shared this with people. At 15, you were kicked out of school because he said, not only were you a danger to yourself, but a danger to others, and that you spent time in a facility. And so share what that was like for you. Did you feel like God had abandoned you? I mean, because you knew God, and now you're in a facility or what did they call it at that time?
It was a residential treatment center for adolescents who had basically were emotionally disturbed and needed to live in a kind of in a group home, I guess you would call it, where we lived on site and the school building was just up the walkway and we didn't leave the property. We went to school on property and we lived in the house and we didn't go very far. I definitely struggled with my faith with God after I lost my brother for a long time. And I became obsessed with dying. At that point, while I was living there, I didn't care about living. I was only hoping that I would die and became absolutely just obsessed with death. I drew about it. I wrote about it. And I was in a very, very dark place. That was why I got kicked out of school. I was in such a dark place in school that they felt that I'm sopping wet when I was in high school. I might have been 105 pounds, really tiny. And they felt that I was a danger to myself and to others in my school and felt that I couldn't come back until I got intensive therapy. So living there, definitely for the first chunk of living there, I was miserable. I even ran away. I tried to run away and got out of there for a little bit, but I only had to come back since I spent about a year and a half there. But as time went on, my relationship with God still grew. Like I always knew that no matter what, there was something, and I don't know how to describe this, but no matter what I went through, no matter how painful it was, like there was just this connection that I had with God because my understanding and my only desire was to be one with God. Like I just wanted to be in the Holy of Holies. I wanted that oneness with God. And that was all I desired, even through all this stuff that was happening. And as a result of going through all of that, it just brought me closer and closer to him. And just knowing that I always knew that everything that I was experiencing, that someday, somehow it was going to benefit others. It wasn't something that was happening to me. It was something for others to help others. And that's really what kept me alive through all of it.
Wow. I mean, because it's an incredible story of all that you went through as a youngster. Now, describe your journey where you're going through Zen and you're going through all these other, alternative, I don't say alternatives. But with all of those, yet tell me what happened.
Yeah. I was introduced to yoga and mindfulness. So on one hand, I'm learning about mindfulness and I'm learning how to be present. But on this other hand, I have all these demons and I have all this pain and I have all this suffering. So while this is happening, I have this yoga and mindfulness that I'm learning. And I have this drug addiction. I came out of the residential treatment center and I became a crack addict. I wound up addicted to crack. Everything that I inherited from my brother, I pretty much sold for drug money and just battled with drugs and alcohol for years as I was going through and following the breadcrumbs. So I learned yoga and mindfulness. Then I wanted to be a yoga teacher. So I took yoga teacher training and I was studying all these philosophies, yoga, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, the Quran. I was reading everything I could get my hands on. And in like every teaching, there would be, especially in Buddhism, one of the precepts was to refrain from the heedless use of intoxicants. And like I could get all the other stuff, right mindfulness, right thinking, right effort, but it was like I got to that one, I'm like, I just can't get this one. I kept struggling with this one. And my drug addiction wound up spiraling. In about 2004, I wound up homeless on the streets of San Diego. I got arrested for possession and was looking at 6 years in prison over my head if I didn't get my crap together.
Oh my goodness. But God
has always, always guided me. He steps in when I can't step in for myself. And I was on an absolute path to self-destruct, but he had bigger plans for me. So he made sure that I got off the streets for a little while and I got into treatment after bouncing out of 3 other treatment centers because I got kicked out of like 3 treatment centers, and I almost wound up doing my 6 years in prison till I finally found a program that I felt comfortable in, that I could be in and do the program. And it became a 6-month program. And even being there at first, the only thing in my mind was, okay, I'm just going to do my requirements. I'm going to do this program. I'm going to do what I need to do to get off probation so I can get the hell out of here and start getting high again, because I don't want to stay sober. I still didn't really want to live. But after being there for a while and working the program and getting a sponsor and doing all those things that I needed to do, something started to shift inside of me where I actually wanted to live again. Wow. I wanted to live, and I wanted to be able to help others. And that started me on my journey of getting sober. I got off crystal meth in 2004. I've never touched it since, and went on to, start studying my theta healing, and then wound up launching my own business.
It's an amazing journey, Mel, that you've had. And I know this has resonated and is resonating with a lot of listeners out there, because we're in now with this pandemic. I think there might be a little bit more, and I don't know this to be true because I haven't been out and about, but there may be a growing proliferation of people going back to medicate and the use of drugs. And here you talk about how the drug addiction and the things that almost led you spiraling down, but there was a God who had a higher purpose. When did you begin to recognize that He is for me and wants me to elevate so that I can share with other people?
I mean, I think I've always known that, but it was my own demons and my own, all the pain and suffering that I still couldn't deal with and be with, and the self-hatred and all the shame and the guilt and feeling like I was powerless to get off the drugs and alcohol. I would sometimes want to, but then I couldn't stop, and I would go back and forth. I mean, my first AA meeting, I was 13 years old when I went to my first AA meeting. Let's just put it that way. So I was introduced to AA at 13 years old, but I've just always known that God wanted more for me. And I think maybe that I had this little well, God has a plan for me, so no matter what I do, I'm going to be okay.
Okay.
I got this little protection over me so I can really screw things up, but I'm still going to be okay because I'm supposed to be here.
Well, that's a good philosophy. Probably kept you going for a while. Saying, I'll be okay. I'll be okay. So how many years do you think you were, I call it running from God. I do call it running from God, although I don't think we recognize it as running, because we were born here and brought here for a purpose and a destiny.
Yeah.
But we do have choices. That's why I fell in love with Him, because He gave us a choice of free will. And I love that.
Yeah.
So you're presented with something and it always is your choice.
Yes.
So when did you recognize that this is my choice to really start moving in a upward direction?
I think shortly after I got sober in 2004 and I got off the streets, and after a few months of being in the program, really realizing that I do have a bigger plan here on this planet. God has a big plan for me, and wanting to really fulfill that and not run from that anymore. But I was born in 78. I was using since I was 13, and I got sober in 2004. So do the math. I can't do it right now.
No, that's okay. But I was doing the math on how long you've been walking with the Lord. That's what I was doing the math. That's where you count.
Yeah.
So when you made that decision, I mean, you were a young child, but when you actually turned your life around and decided no more drugs, no more alcohol, I count the time that you've been walking with Him rather than all of the time that. So what do you think is the most important thing that the listeners or the viewers should know about from your experiences?
There is an absolute higher plan for every single one of us. God has His unique plan for you. Like you are absolutely unique, and you are absolutely necessary. And God needs you to choose Him, to follow His lead so He can take you where He's been designed to take you. Because we have this really small view. We only see at this level and it's a very limited view, but his view is so much bigger and he's got such a bigger vision for us than we could ever imagine. I mean, even what I think is possible is nothing compared to what he has in store for me. So just know that there is a much bigger vision than you could ever even conceive of possible for yourself. You just have to put your trust in him and turn towards him, and he will take you there.
Well, Mel, one of the things that I was fascinated about was that when you came out of the drugs and alcohol, did you ever have any kind of things that try to drag you back or give you memories or bring that to you? And how did that happen? And how did you overcome that? Because I've heard sometimes, that stuff comes back and you
Oh,
think,
yeah, absolutely. And it came back in a different way because I got sober, but then a couple years after I got sober, I actually got into a relationship with someone where I just dimmed my light and shut myself down. I cut all connection. I stopped praying. I stopped reading because this person that I got involved with, my light shined too bright for them. And I didn't want to lose them. I had separation anxiety from losing my brother, being abandoned by my mother, having my parents divorced, like all this abandonment in my life. I had such separation anxiety that I was willing to do whatever I had to do to not lose this person. So for the first 6 years of the relationship, I just shut everything down till I got to a point where I wanted to die again.
oh my goodness. Oh, and then did you start getting that about doing drugs to medicate so you get through?
Yeah, you always think about that, absolutely. But what I got to the point was is that I had this moment where I was like, okay, I'm either going to end my life right now and just be done with this life and come back in another body and start over, or I'm going to do whatever it takes to experience happiness and abundance in every area of my life because I know that's my birthright. I know that's what God put me here to be able to experience, to have that joy and that abundance that he gives to all of us. We just block it. And I made the decision for the latter, to stay alive and to experience happiness and abundance in every area of my life. And it was a huge, huge decision for me because I knew in making that decision that once I started to make that change in my life, that the person that I was with was either going to choose to come along with me or we were going to grow apart. And it took another 7 years, but we eventually grew apart. She did not come along with me, and I had to let her go about a year ago and end that marriage. But yeah, it was putting myself first and putting my happiness first and making sure that I could shine my light for others to change that.
Well, it looks like, you've had quite an experience, but one of the things that's coming out also is the fact that there's God, but he gives us that opportunity to make the choice. Choice is always yours. You have to make the decision.
Yes.
He doesn't force us to do anything. So for my listeners out there, I know you've heard Mel's story today, and it has not been pretty. It hasn't been something kept up with roses. She's had a challenging life, but out of it, God brought her out of it. And today, so tell us, bring us up today, where you are today. We don't want to leave them hanging. Well,
No, we don't. We don't. And it was when I made that decision to put my happiness first, that was the catalyst that changed everything. Because from that point on, about 6 months later was where I got the opportunity to start my business. I received a $50,000 check in the mail. That's a whole other story. But I was able to take 6 months off to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I got the idea to launch my business. Started my business about 8 years ago, and it's been, a roller coaster ride, but just this year alone, I mean, there's a lot of people that are really struggling with COVID. I have to say that COVID has been the best thing that's happened to my business. So many amazing things have happened just this year alone that my business has skyrocketed. I've invested more in myself and in coaching than I ever had in my entire life. I have 3 coaches that I work with on a regular basis. I became a contributor to a book that made me a #1 best-selling author, and I wrote my own book in 7 weeks. And just that alone has just been this year. And it's only been since July that happened, just alone with that. So now I'm getting booked on all kinds of platforms. I'm speaking all over the place. I'm being asked to come talk about my book and share my message. And that's what God has wanted me to be able to get my message out there. My message has always been meant to be shared and help others. And now that's really happening.
Well, I can really applaud you and thank you, because really, when you came on my show and you shared about clutter and with the steps that one needs to actually, I mean, I'd never heard it before. I've had clutter experts or people who talk about cluttering on the show before, but never so clearly articulated with what people needed to know in terms of the steps. But you, as I said earlier in the green room, you reinforced it with an actual client, with someone who had actually, lived that experience that you're talking about. So I really don't normally do this, but I really want people out there, the viewers, as we close the show, you've heard her story. I mean, it wasn't pretty, but look at what has happened. Look at her today. I mean, this is a woman who could have spent 6 years in prison. What a waste. But God saw fit to deliver her, where today, contributing to a #1 best-selling book. She's just written her own book in 6 weeks, and it is absolutely profound. So show your book, because I know you got it, and tell us the name of it.
It's called Freedom from
Clutter. Woohoo! And they can get it at
Amazon.com. You just Google Freedom from Clutter on Amazon. Right now, I think it's the first book that comes up.
Freedom from Clutter.
Yes.
I don't usually do this on God's Hookups, but you know what? This is probably the hookup some of us need, getting rid of the clutter. But she gives such clear instructions, and wow, I was impressed, because I had to, do it, and I have been following some of the rules that you set out in that book. So I just want to thank you, Mel Mason, for being on the show today. Absolute joy, and thank you for being so transparent to tell your story.
My pleasure and honor. Thank you so much, Dr. B.
Many people have benefited from hearing the story that you've shared today. So I just want you guys to know we're bringing every Friday at 11:30, at 1:30, and 2:30. We're bringing 3 guests on this show who are going to share their God's Hookup stories. So I want you to stay with me, stay tuned to God's Hookup Show, and we want to thank you so much for listening. And don't forget, share with a friend. Share with a friend. These stories need to be shared. I am so privileged. And I know, Mel, you feel the same way too, because not often do you get a chance to share this part of your story, because you're usually the clutter expert and talking on another platform. So again, I thank you and appreciate you so much. Have a very blessed week.
You too.
Oh, I just forgot. I did something wrong. Oh! We're going out. We're going out. We're going out.